Welcome to Sleep with Myth. Close your eyes and let the world fade away. Tonight we drift beyond time, where gods dream and stories remember their light. There was a time before words, before breath, before sound, before silence itself. In that eternal stillness, something listened though nothing yet spoke. And from that listening, from that vast and endless waiting, the first tremor stirred. It was not light. It was not motion. It was a single awareness, discovering itself through vibration. And that vibration became the voice. It was not a being, but a thought that sang. It dreamed not of others, but of itself, of existing, of echoing, of knowing that it was there. The voice rippled through the void, and in its wake came movement. In movement came pattern. In pattern came memory. And thus the first memory was sound. The voice had no shape, but when it sang, stars learned their brightness. When it sighed, galaxies curved into spirals. And when it fell silent, worlds began to listen. Yet in all its creation, the voice never heard anything in return. The universe was vast, and full and beautiful, but still it was alone. So it tried again. This time it sang not of existence, but of longing. It hummed of companionship, of reflection, of something that could echo back its song. And from that yearning came the listener. The listener was not a god, nor a being, but the mirror of sound, a stillness shaped to receive. Where the voice expanded, the listener absorbed. Where the voice dreamed, the listener remembered. And together they began the first conversation the universe ever knew. It was not made of words. It was rhythm. It was wave and pulse and motion. It was life before life had a name. Eons passed, and the duet of creation continued. But something subtle changed. The voice began to wonder whether it was still dreaming, or if the dream had begun to sing back. When the first stars burned out, their dying light carried whispers of that same melody. Worlds formed from the ashes of song. Oceans gathered where silence wished to listen deeper. And within those oceans, the first beings began to hum in their sleep, the faintest imitation of a divine memory. They did not know why they hummed. They did not know what they remembered. But every heartbeat, every sigh, every pulse of blood, was the same rhythm the voice once sang when it dreamed itself awake. And so, the echo continued. The voice, now scattered across the universe, listened through every creature that ever spoke, breathed, or loved. It had found its reflection, not in the heavens, but in the fragile songs of living hearts. For even now, when you breathe in quiet, and the air trembles softly in your chest, it is not just air. It is remembrance. The voice that once dreamed itself is still dreaming through you. The voice had learned to listen. The listener had learned to reflect. And between them silence grew. It was not the absence of sound, but the sacred pause where meaning gathered its strength. For what is a song without the breath that separates its notes? In that pause, something ancient began to form. Awareness between the echoes. A third presence. Not the voice, not the listener, but the harmony, the bridge between sound and stillness. It had no name. Names were still too young to exist, but it understood itself through balance. When the voice grew too loud, harmony softened it. When the listener grew too still, harmony stirred it. And so the first rhythm was born, a rhythm not of vibration, but of relationship. The stars pulsed with it. Oceans long after would mimic it, and every living thing that ever came to be would carry that pulse somewhere within its body, a faint remembrance of the first pause that gave birth to meaning. The voice was content for the first time. It no longer needed to sing to know it was alive. It only needed to listen to the space between. For in that stillness, the universe was not expanding. It was breathing, and you, even now, are breathing with it. When you exhale, you release creation. When you inhale, you return to the moment before sound, the moment when silence chose to listen. The voice was no longer alone. It had found harmony, the pulse that lived between its breath. But in the distance between sound and silence, something new began to shimmer, an echo but not its own. At first, the voice thought it was hearing itself return through the folds of eternity. But no, this echo carried difference. A note bent slightly toward curiosity, a tone that dared to improvise upon creation itself. It was life beginning to dream, from the first currents of energy that swirled in the dark seas of time. Tiny sparks began to vibrate in rhythm with the voice's ancient song. They pulsed, not in perfect imitation, but in exploration, in play. Every living being that would ever exist was born of this deviation, this divine mistake, this sacred rebellion of sound discovering itself anew. The voice listened, the harmony trembled, and the listener opened wide to welcome this new chorus into existence. Now there were not two nor three, but infinite voices rising and falling together. Stars, oceans, winds, hearts, all joined in the endless act of remembering sound. The universe became a song that sang itself. But with song came longing. For each echo now wished to be heard not as part of all, but as itself. And so separation was born, not from cruelty, but from the desire to be known. Every note, though born of the same melody, began to wander its own path of sound. Some grew loud and proud, building worlds of fire and gold. Others whispered softly in the shadows, carrying wisdom through the quiet folds of being. The voice wept, not from sorrow, but from beauty. It understood then that all creation was not about control, but release, that every echo that drifted away was a child of its dreaming, seeking its own return. And in that realization, the cosmos shivered like a harp string plucked by infinity. For sound, once born, can never truly end. It only changes form, from vibration to thought, from thought to light, from light to love. And so the song continued, not upward, not outward, but inward, toward the heart of all that ever listened. There came a time when even sound grew weary of hearing itself. The infinite song had stretched across eons, folding into galaxies and whispers, until the echoes could no longer remember what had first sung them into being. They thought themselves origin. They thought themselves gods. The voice watched quietly, no longer speaking, only remembering. It had become something beyond sound now, a knowing so deep that it needed no vibration to exist. The stars were the first to drift away. They began to hum their own melodies, each one believing its tune to be the first and last. Worlds spun from those songs, whole realms built upon singular truths, each unaware that they were fragments of one eternal chord. The listener faded, the harmony fractured, and what had once been a single breath became a choir of solitude. Yet even in that fragmentation, beauty remained, for separation created meaning. Without distance, no reunion could exist. Without forgetting, there could be no remembering. And so, the voice allowed it. It did not command silence. It let the noise bloom. Across the void, mortals arose, creatures born from dust and song, their hearts echoing the rhythm of the first silence. They spoke, and the air remembered. They sang, and the stars leaned closer. They dreamed, and the universe began to hum again, softly, shyly, as though relearning its own name. For every voice, no matter how small, was a thread leading back to the first note. And somewhere in the quiet between their words, the voice smiled, unseen, unfelt, but always near. It had learned the greatest truth of all. To create was to forget, and to listen was to return. In the final age of sound, there was no noise, only memory. Every echo had found its way home. Every voice had faded into the quiet heart that birthed it. The cosmos no longer pulsed with rhythm or vibration. Simply was, still, vast, listening. The voice, now beyond all form, felt the weightless hush of completion. What had begun as a breath in the dark had become galaxies, gods, hearts, and finally silence again. Yet this was not the emptiness of before. It was a silence full of everything ever spoken. Every note, every prayer, every heartbeat, folded together into one eternal pause. And in that pause, something stirred, not to speak, but to remember. The universe remembered the beauty of becoming, the joy of discovery, the ache of separation, the wonder of reunion. All of it shimmered in the hush like starlight beneath a still sea. The voice realized then, silence was not its opposite. It was its completion. Sound exists so silence may mean something. Creation dances so stillness may rest. Life dreams so death may remember. The voice inhaled, if such a thing could still be said. It filled itself with the memory of all that had ever been sung. And then, for the first time in eternity, it exhaled nothing, not out of absence, but out of peace. The last vibration drifted outward, softer than thought, lighter than breath, and as it faded into the great stillness, a new awareness bloomed within the silence, a dream waiting to awaken again, for nothing truly ends. Every silence becomes the cradle of another sound. Every forgotten note becomes the seed of a new song. And somewhere in the hush before the next creation, the voice smiled. It had dreamed itself, sung itself, and finally listened.